Hey guys, so let's get started by actually writing the code. So in order to do that, you first need to spawn up a server, a React Native server, and the way we do is we run the command npx react-native start. Once I run this server, it will give me a bunch of options, right? So it just says, okay, I'm running on 8081, my bad, and it gives bunch of option. I for run on iOS, A for run on Android. So let's just start with A, right? It's already built, and yeah, you can see, right? This is the template application. This is how it looks. So without wasting any time, let's get into our app.tsx. As it says, step 1, edit app.tsx to make changes, right? So let's get rid of all the boilerplate code, and I'll make some room. So we don't need this section. We're going to remove that. We don't need any of these things. We don't even need styles right now, or maybe I'll just keep the styles. I'll just remove the styles define. Okay, if I do one second, if I do clean up, so this is how it looks. Okay, so we don't have anything, right? Now let's start. So the first and the foremost thing is that in React world, or for that matter in the whole of web ecosystem, right, the most common container kind of HTML element is div. So the equivalent of same is view, right? So we'll import view. It gets automatically imported, and we have a view which opens and closes, and there is nothing, right? So the next thing which we will do is we'll say, okay, text, and I'll say hi. You can see, right, hi is getting rendered here, right? Now the thing which has to be kept in mind, unlike React or unlike web world, the components which React Native provides, like view, text, they have to be in uppercase. Basically they cannot, it's not like in React you have div, right? So it's, you can say it's in lowercase. It's not the same here. It starts with a capital letter, right? And second thing which you have to remember is that unlike React world, right, or web world, you cannot render any text just within a div element, right? In React Native you have to use a text if you want to render a text. Else if I just do view hi, it just gives me an error straight away. It's an error, right? And if this happens in a production application, or if it happens in an APK, it will directly crash the application. So let's revert it back. We have the text hi, right? Now since this is a React Native project, let's try to see how can we implement a counter. So for that, what we need obviously a state, right? We'll call it as count, and the setter function we'll call as set count, and we'll initialize it with 0. This is something which people coming from React world will be easily, they'll be easily able to understand this thing. But what are we saying is that, okay, we are creating a state, and the name of the state is count, the initial value is 0, and we also have a setter function whose name we are declaring as set count, right? Now what we'll do is we will render the count here inside the text. You can see it shows 0, right? Now let's create two more texts, DEC, right? Inc and DEC, right? Inc will be for increment, DEC will be for decrement, right? Now if you see, the text element gets a prop called as onPress, and this expects a callback function. Similarly, the same thing we have in other text also, right? It expects a callback function. So people coming from React world, this onPress is very similar to onClick, and people who are not really sure what is this, basically all the elements, all the native elements provided by React Native have some properties, right? So for text, what can be a property? Placeholder is a property. Sorry, my bad, not placeholder. It will have some property like let's try to explore. So if I press control and space on a MacBook, we can see all the properties available. Let me see if we have, okay, so we have a property called as number of line. The reason I'm picking it because this will make you understand things much more clear, right? So by default, React Native gives us bunch of properties. We can say, okay, I want to use a text where number of lines will be two, just two. So if I write something very big, right, something like really big, you can see, okay, it's two lines only. If I just make it one line, it will keep it restricted to one line. So basically every element has some default properties. So just like number of lines, there is a property called as onPress. Now this onPress will be called once you click on the button. So we have kept the text as inc. Whenever inc is clicked, this property will be called. Now what this property or prop essentially does is it tells us, give me a function. I will execute that function whenever onPress property is called. Whenever someone clicks on inc, I will execute the function whichever you give me. So if I just say console log inc clicked, and similarly if I do something for this one, dc clicked, if we expand this thing, if I click on inc, I see inc clicked, I see dec clicked because dec was clicked. So basically there is a property called as onPress. Now that onPress will expect a function, and the way this onPress has been designed by React Native is that whenever there is a click, whenever there is a press, it will execute whatever you have written in the function, whatever is written in the callback function. Pretty straightforward, right? Now what we want to do is, on press of this particular inc, we don't want to log. Why we want to log? What we want to do is we want to say set count, and what we'll do is we'll say count, the previous count plus 1. Okay, and something similar we'll do here is just that we'll do minus, right? So if I click in inc, you can see it becomes 1, 2, 3, and if I click on dc decrement, it decrements, right? Pretty straightforward. All I'm saying is that there is a text element, the text is inc, and there is one more, we're having the text dec. Now these text elements by default have a property called as onPress. Now that onPress expects a function, a callback function. The reason it's called as callback function because whenever there is an onPress event, this function which you have defined inside will be called back, right? And what I've defined inside the function is that update the set count. In case of increment, increment it. In case of decrement, decrement it. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, now what we need to do is we need to somehow make this thing look a little better, not so much great. So let's try to define some styles, right? So in order to define the styles, now people coming from React world can associate more closely that, okay, we use something called as class name, but we also have styles. Something similar we are going to do here. So I'll say style is equal to styles.container. Okay, now where is this style? This style I have already defined. I mean the template defined for us, right? So what is styles? Styles is nothing but stylesheet.create. Now where is the style sheet coming from? Again, React Native. You're saying, okay, style sheet, there's a function called as create, and this is gonna have bunch of objects. So we can see there's an error. Property container does not exist on empty object, right? So we'll just create container, and what we'll say is align items center, justify contents center. Okay, something happened, but not a lot of things happened, right? So we have to also understand that in React Native, by default, views are flexbox. It's already a flexbox. So now since it's a flexbox, I'm able to apply these two properties. All the views in React Native are flexbox by default. So I said align items, I said justify contents. Now this is something that people from React world or from web world will be easily able to understand. But yeah, this is something which we use in order to center align things. But now what we can see is if we consider this as the x-axis and this the vertical one as the y-axis, it has been centered in the x-axis, that is in the horizontal axis, but on the vertical axis, that is the y-axis, it's still not in center. Now the reason for that is we have to give one more property, flex1. The moment we say flex1, what happens, let me put a background color. If I say green, okay, 1 second, yeah, if I say green, and let me remove this first. So see, now what's happening, since it's a flex box and I haven't defined that what is the flex number, right? So when I say make the background as green, you can see that background is green, but it is only green for the area which has been the height which has been taken by the components. It's not green for the entire screen. So what you want to do is you want this view to cover up this whole area. Then the simple and the most straightforward way in React Native is give it a flex1. The moment you give it a flex1, it's gonna take the full height. And now we can get rid of this green. Okay, it looks pretty decent now. What we'll do is let's define some styles to our count. We'll say styles.count and we'll be like, okay, count, and first thing is we'll define color and we'll say black. Now we have to remember few things. Even though we didn't define black or any color, it was still showing, right, some color similar to black. But that's not true for all the devices. This is a Pixel 7 emulator. The moment you run this thing on Samsung, you will not see anything, because what happens when you don't define a color to a text element, it inherits the color from the default of the device. Now for Samsung, the default is white, so you'll absolutely not see anything. So irrespective whether you're seeing things on your simulator, emulator, you have to define the color, else if you don't define the color, it will take the system default. So let's say black. And then we have other properties like font size. I'll say font size is 40. Now thing to remember here is that in the web world we define pixel, px, right? You don't have to do all those things. 40 is straight away 40 pixel. You don't have to use the word px, right? We also have something like font weight, right? And font weight is basically an enum. It cannot be you cannot put something like 150. It just straight away gives an error. There are some predefined values which can be used. I'll say okay, 800. Fair enough. Okay, little too big, hurting my eyes. I'll make it 500 and I'll say margin bottom is 20. Okay, now I have some spacing, right? That's pretty straightforward, right? Now the next thing I want to do is what I want is, let me show that. I want these two buttons should be just next to each other, right? Instead of being vertically stacked on top of each other, I want them to be placed parallelly, right? That is in the same scale, right? So what we can do is we can create one more view and we will wrap both the text in the same view, and we'll give a style called as styles.button container, and let's define it. Now what we want to do is we want to change the flex direction. So the concept again remains very similar from the web world. If I just say flex direction, it gives me option row. The moment I make it row, you can see they are just next to each other, right? Now let's try one property called as gap, which is again present in the web world. Something similar we have here, right? And also let's define a couple of things for these things. Styles.btn, and the same style I'll give for the other button, btn, and I'll just say color, let's use hot pink, and font size as maybe this will be 32, font weight as 400. Okay, Still not a very great looking UI, but yeah, we have a UI and we are able to do some very basic operations, right? So in nutshell, to summarize this thing, we have a React component called as app. In that we have a state called as count, and it's set a function which is set count, right, which is initialized with 0. And in the JSX we have a view, the topmost container view, which is this whole thing, which contains a text field which is rendering the count, and then we have a one more view which is for the button for containing all the buttons, and we have texts, two more texts, which is inc and dec decrement. So that's pretty much it, that how a counter, simple counter, can be made with the React Native project. Now the question which should arise here is, I'm referring button but I'm using text. Yes, that's a good question. We have this prop on press on text, and to make you understand a little more, like instead of using some other component, I thought text will make more sense, so that's why we use text. But in future we are not going to use text straight away. We are going to use some other components, right? So let's dive into the other sessions where we'll be learning more about other core concepts of React Native.